In 1982, a little-known company called StarPath created an add-on for the Atari 2600 that allowed the streaming of game data from audio cassettes. This eventually led to the creation of a game called Dragon Stomper. When compared to today's standards, this game looks primitive. However, it introduced gamers to a new way to play games. Because of its use of an inventory, statistics for the players, and turn-based combat, it is considered to be the world's first console role-playing game, also known as an RPG. Considering the great video game crash happened the next year in America, it's not surprising where the next great games came from. Games such as Dragon Quest on the Famicom continued to introduce gamers to this growing genre of games. These games took place in a classically medieval setting. However, it would take a new voice in the genre to allow gamers to experience RPGs outside of this type of setting. Sega, formerly known as Service Games until 1965, was a company known for their arcade units in Japan and the SG-1000 home console. In 1985, they introduced the Mark III, the third iteration of the SG-1000 hardware, which was backwards compatible with the games of the previous two consoles. This was eventually released in the United States and elsewhere as the Sega Master System. Finally, on December 20th, 1987, a mere 2 days after Square released Final Fantasy, Sega released Phantasy Star. Phantasy Star would cross the sea and be released in the United States and Europe the following year. It initially released with a steep price tag in America of $80. Created by Kotaro Hayashida, who had also worked on Alex Kidd in Miracle World, and as a product of Sega's AM7 team, Phantasy Star's story was epic for its time. Upon reading the back of the box, the player learned that in the futuristic setting of this game, the main protagonist wasn't a man or a robot, but a woman. In an age where the likes of Samus Aran of Metroid and Mary of Quartet had gone before, Alice helped Sega to also claim the title of the first console RPG to feature a main female protagonist. Alice's story revolved around the death and revenge of her brother Nero. Nero had been investigating the activities of the king of Algol, Lazik. However, taking on Lazik alone would be an impossible feat. That didn't mean she didn't have some help. Filling the ranks of the team were 3 other members: Meow, a musk cat who was traded for with a Laconian pot, Odin, a master of axes and guns who was turned to stone by Medusa, and Noah, an Esper, which is a being with the strongest known magic. In order to search these party members out, Alice had to search not just only her world, but all 3 planets that made up the Algol system. Palma, a planet lush in vegetation and water, Motavia, a desert planet with 1 large lake, and Dizorus, a planet covered in snow and ice. After finding Meow and Odin, and before setting out to find Noah, the party encounters something when they sleep at the governor's place, but it is passed off as a bad dream. Along the way, you also meet up with Dr. Levino, a scientist that helps you get back into space after the normal methods of travel between the planets is shut down, and Hapsby, a robot that serves as pilot for the Doctor's spaceship. Aside from Lazik, you also come across Dr. Mad, a man who takes pleasure in the killing of creatures, and Medusa, a being that can turn anyone to stone. However, the defeat of Medusa was not a requirement to beat the game. Medusa was in fact an optional boss. If you wanted to take her and Lazik on, however, you were going to need more than just 4 party members. To reach the center of a poisonous cloud, a gas shield was needed. Noah's old master held the Frayed Mantle, which was liberated after a one-on-one fight. In addition, the Mirror Shield, which helped you challenge Medusa, was found on a small island on Motavia. Medusa held the Laconian Axe for Odin. Laconia is one of the hardest materials in Algol, and would serve the party well as both weapons and armor. Unfortunately, you couldn't just walk into a shop and purchase it. The powerful armor lay hidden in dungeons on Dizorus. Odin could also use the various guns sold throughout Algol. Finally, Alice's strongest sword, the Laconian Sword, was found inside a tower on a small island on Palma after defeating a red dragon. To defeat Lazik, the team would also need a number of special items. A road pass became available after pressing a merchant to sell you one 3 times, which let you head towards the spaceport. While you initially traded yours away to get Meow, a new Laconian pot could be obtained after defeating Dr. Mad. This was used to house a special kind of nut that would allow Meow to transform into a great winged beast. The Arrow Prism would point out the location of the Air Castle, and finally a crystal would help in the battle against Lazik himself. Spaceships allowed the passage of the player between planets, but there were also ways to move around on the surface of the planets. The Land Rover allowed the player to cross antlion pits without the fear of being attacked and forced back. The hovercraft allowed the player to cross bodies of water. Finally, the Ice Digger allowed the player to dig through the walls of the ice that filled Dazorus' surface. After collecting the items necessary to begin an assault on Lazik, the team heads for Biomalay, the tower that leads to the air castle that rises above Palma. Once Lazik is defeated and the player seems to have everything sorted out, the player returns to the governor of Motavia. Upon arriving, however, the team is sent down a pitfall, and in this place, they find a being known as Dark Falls. Dark Falls, as it turns out, was the succubus the player had fought earlier in the game. Dark Falls is the only creature in the game to not show its health next to its name. Upon defeating it, you learn that Dark Falls was controlling the governor, and upon hearing that Lazik has been defeated, Alice is given the opportunity to become the Queen of Alkol. The team that designed Phantasy Star at the time used a set of pen names. This was revealed by one of the assistant coordinators, Gamer Miki, also known as Miki Morimoto, in an interview with Sega Saturn magazine in 1996. Miki also made an in-game appearance in the town of Sopia. The music and sound of Phantasy Star was composed by Bo, also known as Tokohiku Wabo. Back then, he had also done work on Alex Kidd in Miracle World, Choplifter, Fantasy Zone, Space Harrier, and Zillion. In total, 19 pieces were composed for Phantasy Star. Phantasy Star was composed to be supported by the programmable sound generator sound chip, as well as the Yamaha FM synthesis add-on, which in turn allowed the same piece of music to be heard in 2 different ways. This add-on also affected the sound effects coming from the game. Mu Yuji, also known as Yuji Naka, was the main programmer, and his name would stay tied to the series for a number of years. From a technical standpoint, Phantasy Star was a cut above most of the other console RPGs that were available at the time. While most RPGs would have players crawling through dungeons at a bird's-eye view, Phantasy Star took the player through a fully realized 3D world. While some others may have existed, Phantasy Star showed the party moving toward the next spot, and brought about the animation of the walls moving. Others would only cut from one space to another. As the player progressed, the creatures also got progressively more difficult. Initially, when the game began, Alice would come across no more than 2 creatures in a group at the same time. Once you had all 4 party members, this number had expanded up to a literal deathmatch, with as many as 8 creatures being fought at the same time. The game was also not above poking fun at the material it comes from. The guards in town looked like stormtroopers, and you could even purchase a lightsaber at one point. Reiko Kodama, during an interview, stated that they wanted to build a world like Star Wars, but only have a few parts of it. The reception of the game has often placed it on various top lists for the Sega Master System. Even as recently as 2012, Phantasy Star continues to receive accolades, being honored by the Smithsonian American Art Museum as part of an exhibition called The Art of Video Games. The impact this game had on the industry in turn allowed the series to progress since then and produce over 25 games, not counting remakes or collections. In the next part of the retrospective, Sega looks towards the future on a new console, and an artificial intelligence brings both prosperity and horror.